And Trump says Nvidia's top AI chips reserved for the US, not for other countries, including China. All that and more coming up on AWANI International. The US is not considering a deal for Ukraine to obtain long-range Tomahawk missiles for use against Russia, at least for now. President Donald Trump says he does not want to escalate the war. Asked by reporters aboard Air Force One if he was considering a deal to sell the missiles, Trump said no. He added, however, that he could change his mind. Last month, Trump and NATO Secretary Mark Rutte discussed a plan for the U.S. to sell Tomahawks to NATO countries that would then transfer them to Ukraine. Rutte said on Friday that the matter remains under review and that it is for the U.S. to decide. Tomahawk missiles have a range of about 2,500 kilometers, long enough for Ukraine to strike targets deep inside Russia, including Moscow. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has requested missiles, but the Kremlin has warned against any transfer of Tomahawks to Ukraine. In other news, Nvidia's most advanced AI chips will be reserved for U.S. companies and kept out of China and other countries, says U.S. President Donald Trump. The move follows lingering concerns in Washington that access to such technology could strengthen China's military and AI capabilities.
Nvidia is really just a brilliant company. The chips are 10 years. The new Blackwell that just came out, it's 10 years ahead of every other chip. There's nothing to beat with other than say, congratulations. But no, we don't give that chip to other people. We don't give that chip to other people.
Questions lingered since August on whether Trump would allow sales of a scaled-down version of the AI giant's next-generation Blackwell GPU to China. Although he previously hinted at raising the issue with Chinese President Xi Jinping, the topic was not discussed during their recent summit in South Korea. Nvidia CEO Jensen Huang said last week the company has not applied for U.S. export licenses to sell in China, citing Beijing's own restrictions. Meanwhile, Nvidia announced it will supply over 260,000 Blackwell AI chips to South Korea, including to tech giants like Samsung Electronics. That's our top news. Stay tuned for more after this break.
Dalam keadaan sekarang kau tak ada pilihan. Kalau tak, aku tahan kau, aku sumbat kau dalam kau.
Tuan, dengar tak? Nama suspek Dali, Tuan. Nama suspek Dali.
Tariffs on imports of products from China reaching up to 145%.
Tariffs on the rest of the world are sitting at 10%, with the potential for reciprocal tariffs to be reimposed within 90 days.
Kunjungan rasmi Presiden China ke Malaysia ini menunjukkan komitmen kedua-dua negara untuk meningkatkan hubungan diplomatik ke tahap yang lebih strategik.
Welcome back. Hamas has handed over 3 more bodies of Israeli hostages amid a fragile ceasefire in Gaza. The coffins were transferred through the Red Cross and transported into Israel for identification. The remains are believed to belong to 3 of the 11 hostages Israel has been seeking under the terms of the ceasefire. Now, Israel has accused Hamas of moving too slowly in handing over the bodies, while Hamas said it is working under difficult conditions amid rubble and a lack of heavy machinery. The truce has mostly calmed fighting, allowing hundreds of thousands of Palestinians to return to the ruins of their homes, as Israel withdraws troops from cities and allows more aid into the Strip. But violence has not fully stopped. Palestinian health officials said 236 people, have been killed in Israeli strikes since the ceasefire began on October 10th, nearly half of them in a single day last week after Israel retaliated for an attack on its troops. Israel said 3 soldiers have been killed and that it has targeted dozens of members of Hamas. Meanwhile, ministers from Turkey, Qatar, the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Pakistan, and Indonesia has met in Istanbul on Monday to discuss the fragile ceasefire in Gaza. The talks come as Hamas and Israel continue to accuse each other of violations, while discussions move forward on creating a force to monitor the truce. Now, according to a Turkish Foreign Ministry source, the ministers are expected to address both the ceasefire and the humanitarian situation in Gaza. Earlier, Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan said the meeting would focus on the next stage of the US brokered ceasefire deal and the formation of a planned international stabilization force. The truce, which came into effect on October 10th, has faced repeated challenges, leaving key issues, including Hamas's disarmament and a timeline for Israel's withdrawal, unresolved. In other news, Nigeria denies US President Donald Trump's claims of mass killings of Christians, saying Boko Haram and Al Qaeda linked groups target people of all faiths. The country says it will welcome aid from the US in fighting armed groups as long as its territorial integrity is respected.
On Sunday, Trump said the U.S. military could deploy troops to Nigeria to conduct airstrikes to stop what he called the persecution of Christians. The comment followed his earlier threat to take military action if Nigeria failed to act against what he described as mass killings. Nigeria, a nation of more than 200 million people, is divided between a largely Muslim north and mostly Christian south. Armed groups have been active mainly in the northeast for over 15 years in a conflict that has killed tens of thousands and displaced millions. Trump's warning came a day after his administration returned Nigeria to its countries of particular concern list for religious freedom violations, alongside China, Myanmar, North Korea, Russia, and Pakistan.
Chinese and Russian heads of government are meeting in China to deepen strategic coordination and expand cooperation across multiple sectors. Russian Prime Minister Mikhail Mishustin is expected to meet Chinese President Xi Jinping and Premier Li Qiang, with talks expected to focus on economic and technological collaboration amid rising Western pressure.
Their last heads of government meeting was held in Moscow in August 2024, where Premier Li praised the renewed vigor in bilateral ties. Xi and President Vladimir Putin signed a no-limits partnership in February 2022, just before Russia's war in Ukraine started. Since then, Moscow has leaned on Beijing to offset the impact of Western sanctions, boosting trade and energy cooperation as well as increasing the use of China's yuan in cross-border transactions. The visit comes as U.S. President Donald Trump accused Russia and China of secretly conducting nuclear weapons tests, suggesting the United States should do the same. Trump said the U.S. has more nuclear weapons than any other country and revealed he had discussed denuclearization with both Putin and Xi.
U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth has arrived in South Korea for talks with Defense Minister An Gyu-bak, aimed at strengthening the military alliance between the two nations. His visit includes a trip to the Joint Security Area inside the demilitarized zone, the first by both countries' defense chiefs since October 2017. On Tuesday, Hegseth and An will hold their annual security consultative meeting to discuss coordination on North Korea and ways to reinforce their combined defense posture. Washington is also weighing a more flexible role for the 28,500 U.S. troops stationed in South Korea, potentially allowing operations beyond the peninsula amid growing concerns over China's activities in the South China Sea and around Taiwan. Hegseth is also expected to visit the Panmunjom Truce Village along the demilitarized zone with An. The visit comes as U.S. President Donald Trump and South Korean leader Lee Jae-myung discussed ways to improve ties with Pyongyang, an idea North Korea has since dismissed. Oil demand will remain above 100 million barrels per day beyond 2040, according to the UAE oil giant ADNOC's chief executive, Sultan Al Jaber. UAE is one of the 8 OPEC Plus members that has agreed to raise December output, but pause increases in the first quarter of 2026 as the group moderates plans to regain market share amid concerns of a supply glut. New Western sanctions on OPEC Plus member Russia are adding to challenges in their strategy, as Moscow may struggle to further raise output after the US and Britain imposed fresh measures on top producers Rosneft and Lukoil. However, Al Jaber said that the long-term outlook shows growth in energy demand, adding that cost discipline must be balanced with capital investment. OPEC Plus has granted the UAE a bigger production quota this year after the country said the producer group was restricting its output too much when it had invested heavily to expand capacity to 4.85 million barrels per day from 3 million barrels per day. UAE Energy Minister said in July that his country could further boost its oil capacity after 2027 if that is what markets require, implying the country had the potential to become one of the world's 5 biggest producers. During a panel at the energy conference, Qatar's energy minister Saad Al-Kaabi also said that his country will not be delivering liquefied natural gas to Europe if the EU does not look at how to water down sustainability law or cancel it. US President Donald Trump says he will be involved in Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's corruption trial. In an interview with CBS's 60 Minutes, Trump called the ongoing trial very unfair, saying he will help Netanyahu out.
Trump has repeatedly intervened in Israel's judicial and political affairs over the case. Last month, during his address to the Israeli parliament, Trump urged President Isaac Herzog to pardon Netanyahu, a request he later said came directly from the prime minister. Netanyahu is on trial for bribery, fraud, and breach of trust in 3 separate cases. He has been accused of accepting more than $200,000 in gifts from wealthy businessmen and of granting regulatory benefits worth hundreds of millions to a telecom tycoon in exchange for favorable news coverage. The trial has dragged on for 4 years, partly due to Netanyahu's repeated legal delay tactics.
US President Donald Trump has played down the prospect of a US war with Venezuela, but suggested President Nicolas Maduro's days in power may be numbered. His remarks on CBS's 60 Minutes come as the US continues air and naval strikes on alleged drug smuggling vessels in the Caribbean.
The Trump administration says the operations are aimed at curbing the flow of narcotics into the United States. Maduro, who faces U.S. drug trafficking charges, has accused Washington of using the issue as a pretext for regime change to seize Venezuela's oil resources. At least 64 people have been killed in more than 15 U.S. strikes across the Caribbean and Eastern Pacific since early September. Governments across the region, along with human rights groups, have condemned the attacks, calling them extrajudicial killings, even if they are targeting known traffickers.
That concludes AWANI International for tonight. Stay with us as we track the strategies and power shifts shaping the new global order. For more updates, visit international.astroawani.com and follow us on our social media. I'm Farhana Sheikh. Thank you for watching and good night.
Daulat Tuanku.
Di dalam setiap berita yang dibawa, konteks amat penting. Kami sentiasa membawakan yang tergempar dan terkini. Pastikan Astro Awani menjadi pilihan anda, tidak kira di mana sahaja anda berada.